I want to welcome our on this first conversation on issues regarding impacting our town. I'm Gary Waldeck. I was a Los Altos Hills Council member for 8 years and twice served as their mayor. And as the town begins to celebrate their 65th birthday, I think it's appropriate to reflect back on how this town was founded. A group of us believe that the town is in a key inflection point in the history. We want to look back at the guiding principles that were followed when our town was formed. And many of you may hear of the green sheets. Well, that's what we're talking about. They still formed the basis for the town 65 years ago. And we want to see how we can forge a path forward for the next 65 years that accommodates those objectives and keeps us together, if that's the right word. In that end, we're preparing a series of conversations with people who have some basic knowledge about how a town should be run and some of the issues that we've seen in Los Altos Hills. So with that, we are championing a series of conversations to do just that. We want to explore best practices from other communities on how these issues are dealt with and how they affect us as a community. So in our form of government, our city manager is just like the CEO of our town. The city manager sets the tone and the environment for our community. And I will be talking today with Jim Cogan. He is I think it's a deputy city manager down in Paso Robles. Is that correct, Jim?
I was the assistant city manager in Paso Robles. Now I'm in the private sector, actually. I started an agricultural technology accelerator here in town.
Oh, understand. Oh, congratulations on your change here.
Thank you.
The bottom line is he has the experience of being in the leadership role of a small city. And so, Jim, I'd like to give us 2 or 3 minutes, if you can, a quick summary of your background so people can get an understanding of where you're coming from and some of your experiences.
Sure, and thank you, Gary, and thank you everyone to watching. I hope this is informative. The goal is definitely to take a look at government and make sure that everybody has a better understanding of it, and that we're always forging ahead to make sure that residents and leaders are working together to the best interests of our community. My background is a bit meandering, but I'll tell you that I've worked at every level of city government, from the grass crew for a Parks and Recreation Department, Nashua, New Hampshire, up to being the assistant city manager and even a chief of staff for full-time elected council members who had full-time staff. So I was the chief of staff for 3 different council members in San Jose. I was the Affordable Housing and Economic Development Manager for the city of Menlo Park. And then in my last post, I was the Assistant City Manager for the city of Paso Robles, California.
Very good. Thank you. That's quite an experienced background. Thanks a lot. Let's see here. One of the questions that has been posed is that the council manager form of government has been likened to like a board of directors and a CEO of a company. Can you give us a quick understanding of what that means and how it affects people and our constituents?
Sure. In some ways, it's a very apt analogy, because in the business world, the CEO is hired and fired by the board of directors, and the board of directors is ultimately responsible for the financial oversight of the company. But the analogy breaks down in a couple of areas. The first is that boards of directors very rarely have such intimate interaction with stakeholders or shareholders as council members wind up having with members of the community. And in business governance, the board of directors is not always chosen by shareholders, and so there isn't that close communication, that close interaction that you have between elected officials and their constituents, especially in a small community like Los Altos Hills. I think the second way that the analogy breaks down is in shared experience. You know, many of the people who sit on a board of directors have run companies and have been involved in companies before. When it comes to city government, it is often the case that the people elected to the city council don't have city government experience before being elected. And so they either, they often go one of two ways. They either don't understand city government very well and feel like they can't trust city staff, or they trust city staff too much. And I feel like the best is this uh, respectful tension where elected officials trust but verify everything they're hearing from city staff. And so in order to accomplish that, you really need to have excellent communication between the staff and the council, and a city staff that is truly engaged and interested in making sure that the council is as well informed um, and well educated about city government as possible. You know, the days of take my word for it are and should be gone when it comes to running a city.
You need supportive evidence, in other words, right? You know, Jim, how did you work with the city council members individually? What was your interaction with them?
So when I was professional staff, I had a close relationship with city council members, and I think that's largely due to the fact of having been a chief of staff and really understanding where city council members were coming from. You know, I think one of the big failures, and in fact, something that I said at a staff retreat in Menlo Park that was a light bulb aha moment for a lot of the city staff, was that they didn't understand what it was like to sit on the dais and try and make heads or tails of staff reports, and that they didn't understand what it was like to have your friends and neighbors telling you one thing while city staff was trying to convince you of something else. And that is a very difficult place to be, and to sit in that kind of judgment without enough information or enough background is really setting elected officials up for failure. So my goal was always to have council members involved in the work to the point where they understood it, they trusted it, and they could offer valuable feedback. You know, it's kind of like working with the media. If we don't give them any information, how can we expect them to write good stories? And you know, I think that is one of the themes that I've seen play out in city government over and over. You know, we don't give enough information and we still expect them to make good decisions.
I hardly understand that one. How do you work with residents? It's just like the opposite side of the coin, isn't it?
Well, it is, but at the same time, you know, I'm a firm believer that you have to respect, you know, some of this is from my ROTC background, but you have to respect the chain of command. And, you know, the chain of command is residents at the top, the elected officials work for the residents, city staff works for elected officials, which means that city staff should feel comfortable being able to talk to the residents and provide them with information. It has been my experience that residents, when given the opportunity to um, ask as many questions as they want, given a lot of background, can understand where staff is coming from. And at the very least, if you provide the opportunity for them to ask questions and get information, there's a level of trust built. So if they don't understand everything, because not everybody is a traffic engineer, they at least trust that you have their best interests in heart, and you're doing your absolute best to spend money respectfully and efficiently, because ultimately it's taxpayer money that city staff are spending, and there needs to be uh, a lot of respect paid to that. You know, there all too often you'll see staff throw money at consultants or um, projects that seem like they're more for the legacy some senior official at a city rather than something that's really for the benefit of the community. And that just doesn't have any place in the spending of taxpayer dollars.
I agree with you. Los Altos Hills is unique. We have a series of committees. I think last count was 15. Might be up to 22 now. I've forgotten actually the number. But the point is that these are volunteers who come into the city council and say, I'd like to help work on one thing or another. It might be finances, it might be roads, it might be pathways. There's like I say, there's quite a number of committees. And so they've turned out to be a very key asset for the town. But some of the things that we've seen and heard in the past is that there's not always a full agreement with management in terms of their assessment. So how would you recommend that the city manager interact with the committees, knowing that there's going to be contentious issues on both sides, that I don't have enough money, or I don't have the time, or the staff, but the other guys say, well, we really want this, and so trying to figure it out. How would you work that?
Well, it can be a challenge, of course, because 15 committees could take a lot of staff time to provide information, and everything has to be done within the Brown Act so that you have equal access for all of the members of the community, especially since it's my understanding that those committees have at least one council member on them, as well as volunteers from the community.
That's correct, yeah.
But it's also, what a wonderful opportunity to help get the word out on work that the city is doing, help educate people on some of the intricacies. And we live in California, so everything is more complicated than it should be. And to develop people's interest in serving on other commissions, or to serve on the city council themselves. What a great way to provide a bench of talent to bring in and be part of city governance. I think with that mentality and that value, it would take on a very different interaction than what I've heard it is right now. And I think that in city government, there's definitely a lot of staff tend to be more introverted and don't none of us likes criticism, but there tends to be um, a blurring of the lines between the issue that someone's talking about and the individual. And the only way that I have found to better distinguish those lines, I worked in Menlo Park, where we have some brilliant residents, and they wouldn't necessarily be happy about the stuff that was going on, or they'd be concerned about funding. And I think my proudest moments were when residents would get up and they were sophisticated in the knowledge, because we had talked about all these sides of the issue, and they could say, Jim is great and he's smart and he's doing a good job. I just don't agree with this one project or this one aspect, because then the lines were clear. They knew that they could trust me, and that the information I was giving them was accurate, and we just had a difference of opinion. And that for me was great. I also had situations where I had a staff report and residents were genuinely touched and surprised that I had written their concerns into the staff report as part of the background. And I was surprised because, my background coming as a chief of staff and someone who had spent a lot of time articulating and detailing community concerns, it's just part of the process. Like, of course you should have any concerns that residents voice as part of the staff report, because it's part of giving a full picture of the issue, which should always be staff's goal. I would tend to bring staff reports forward that had 2 or 3 options for the elected officials and try and explain each option. And of course, I had my professional opinion as to which way the city should go. But if the staff or the council decided not to go the direction that I was recommending, it wasn't of any offense to me, and it didn't upset me at all. It's That's my job, is just to
No,
provide
that
such
just means
effective
you're
staff.
looking at it from a different perspective and have a slightly different answer.
Right.
And that's normal in the course of a council type environment.
Right.
Let me move on here. One of the concerns that we've had in Los Altos Hills is the annual performance review of the city manager. Now, as a part of that process in the past, I can tell you that it's been very secretive, and it basically is the basis for either renewing or not their contract with the city. In many cases, public input was not encouraged. And I don't know if this was a function of the council or the management, but that was one of the things that I observed while I was on the council. So what would you suggest be done to make that process more transparent? Right now, in the years past, it's been a fairly close environment that made that decision. And I'm not convinced, even having been there, that this was the best answer available. So having said that, what would you suggest as a difference as opposed to just 5 people sitting down talking about it?
Well, I think that, it's a delicate topic, and I think, there's a lot of um, labor law that surrounds any kind of conversation about personnel. I do think that there should be an element of transparency and public input. I think in a best case scenario, probably the mayor would take the lead on that, and you could have an announcement at a council meeting ahead of time that says, we'll be accepting public input over the next month related to the city manager's um, performance over the last year or 2 years, whatever the period of the contract is. And if you have specific input you'd like the council to consider, please email the mayor. Beyond that, I think that it's probably the council and the mayor will have a pretty good understanding going into the um, the city manager's performance review, how they feel about the manager's performance,
Mhm.
and then of course any very public comments or media um, articles that have been part of the discussion will definitely color that perception. But I think that a little public input is a good thing, because I think the biggest missing component for most city managers, and absolutely for staff below the city manager, is that connection to the residents, and that ultimately everyone is there to provide the best service possible to the community. One of the interesting aspects of city management is that so many city managers are um, somewhat transient. The average period that a city manager is in a city is 5 years, and then the city hires a new city manager. So that means that these city managers that work 30 or 35 years may have been in 7 to 10 different cities in the period of time, and they're not going to live in all of those cities. Um, some might argue that the very way that city managers are taught and perform their duties is what results in them spending so few years in a city, especially compared to some of the staff below them that can spend 20 to 30 years in one city. So I think that that focus on the residents, the focus on the value of community organizations and being part of the community really helps to keep that priority on serving residents, one of the top focuses for a city manager.
That gives me another question here. Our manager's been here for about 18 years. He's frankly due to retire in his 60s, about 2 more years. He's in his late 50s now. And is that a good model? for city managers in dynamic environments?
I think it all depends. It's tough to say that any one model works. There's definitely value in having a city manager that has served the same community for a long period of time.
Mhm.
At the same time, city managers that are always, that have the potential of losing their job as one of the motivators for making sure that they're communicating well with the residents is is another um, is another valuable motivator. Here in Paso, the current city manager is not a resident of the city, and he actually has only been here for 5 years, and he lives in Southern California and rents an apartment up here in Paso, and that's not a good model. I think that having a city manager that participates in Rotary or Kiwanis or coaches youth sports or any of those other things that we all do as residents helps build that value in the fabric of the community for the person who is actually helping to lead the community. And I think so a little longer term is good as long as there is both incentive um, and a penalty for not having that open collaborative approach to government.
I understand. Our current city manager's been here, I said, 18 years. And one of the observations we've made is that it tends to be enlightening in terms of your self-worth. And that's not always a good thing. Let me go into the next area here. We have several multi-million-dollar contracts. The most recent one is $50+ million for 15 years of garbage disposal, garbage collection. And there were some serious problems with the renewal of this contract with our current vendor. How would you handle that kind of contract negotiation? Oh, by the way, I might add that it seems like the price of that contract jumped by about $6 million over what they could have gotten. And from what I've heard from people who are well into the finances, they're not happy.
Well, I think anything like that and garbage contracts are the worst. There are so many people who have lost their jobs or lost their offices as a result of garbage contracting. And all pun aside, it really can be a dirty business. And so I think that going into it, personally, I would look at which of those committees you mentioned has the kind of opportunity to provide input and insight into the garbage contract. And I would make sure that they were aware of what was currently happening, not only with our garbage contract, but with other cities of similar size. And, you can never educate people too much. And so I would provide as much information as possible and encourage them to talk with their counterparts in other cities. So then when the contract does come up for renewal, you have the council, you have residents and city staff who have a level of expertise into what that contract, what the market is for that contract. Because it's always very possible that, a $6 million increase is the market, and there's just nothing you can do about it. That's just the market. But you need to make sure that that is the case, and if it is, then it's all a matter of perspective and communication, from my opinion. Oh, Gary, it looks like you're muted.
I had it on mute for a second. I agree with a good portion of what you said there. In our particular case, we did have a number of people involved in different committees, particularly the finance committee. But after a point, the committee's participation drops and the focus is on the actual negotiation. And it's at that point, I think that maybe some I won't say errors, but some choices were made that has adversely affected the community. I don't want to dwell on that at this point, but I just to point out that it's the kind of thing that can happen once the citizens are in effect pushed aside and okay, let the leaders take it on from there. Different topic. Our current governance model is more than 120 years old. And so the question is, can we or should we reinvent the model to reflect the 21st century? In other words, how can we better embrace public-private partnerships to redefine the model? Is that a good idea, or is it something that's going to be so chaotic that you really don't want to pass down that route?
Well, of course, the devil is in the details. I think that, one of the upsides of the pandemic, if there is just the way that we're communicating right now, through Zoom. Cities across the state and across the country have embraced that kind of technology. People are able to participate more online. So council meetings that used to seem to take place behind closed doors, they weren't behind closed doors. They were just in at maybe inconvenient times for people who have to make dinner and get their family situated for the next day. People can now participate that weren't able to participate before. And since our entire model of government at every level is based on participation, I think that, we should, one of the first changes we should make in reinventing things is making sure that we're providing as many opportunities for public participation as possible. One of the things that I've always found surprising, especially with small cities, is that staff reports typically come out on a Friday afternoon for a Monday or Tuesday council meeting, and we expect everybody to read them over the weekend and become experts. Staff will spend months putting together these staff reports, and then they marvel at the fact that people don't necessarily understand them on Tuesday night. And there are certain things that we could do both with technology and just looking at the model and making some adjustments about providing even just the titles of what is likely to come forward or what is on the draft agenda 2 weeks in advance, so that people can then start preparing and planning. I think there's plenty of evidence of where some public-private partnership works, where you've got consultants coming in or work being bid out to private contractors. I always used to say that the government and the economy, it's like creating a campfire. So government can put together all of the kindling, but it really takes private investment to create the spark. And so I think part of the public-private partnership that I would like to see in government is a better understanding of what the other side needs. And, so often city staff stare at applicants and have no idea why they're not doing something that they think is best. And it's because they don't understand anything about SEC filings and, that a project might pencil in one quarter, but it's not going to pencil in another quarter, or that construction materials have gone up 25 to 50% in the last quarter as far as the cost of them. And having more of that understanding can only help us all do a better job of serving the community.
Absolutely agree with you. Moving on here. Let's see here. There's a significant capability, intellectual, business horsepower, practical knowledge. How can we better harness that collective wisdom? We've had the committee structure in place for over 60 years, and what I think the beauty about the committees is that the people who have an interest in a particular topic can then go volunteer to work for that environment. But there's a broader spectrum here that I think we need to take into account as well. And my question is, how would we attach that knowledge to better help the city?
Well, I mean, it all comes back to clear communication. I would I would recommend, I'm an extrovert, so things that work for me aren't necessarily going to work for other folks, but I'd love to see city managers do a monthly coffee meeting, or have a quarterly opportunity for folks to come in and just talk to city staff about what they're working on. You might not get a lot of people at first, or you might not get a lot of people every time, but I think that having that openness and having that physical demonstration that people are welcome to come in. One of my favorite episodes or themes from the TV show The West Wing is the Big Block of Cheese Day, where groups that wouldn't normally have
I remember
access
that well. Yeah.
and so I think every city should have kind of a big block of cheese day where they invite folks in and give them the opportunity to share concerns or ideas. And then frankly, I think that there are times where city government can only go so far, and a lot of it has to do with investment in corporate or in commercial property or even residential property. And we tend to think of government as the magic wand that can fix everything, but that's absolutely not the case. And so often it takes private investment or private opportunity. And what I witnessed in city government was that all too often mistaken "we know best" mentality, when there were just market realities that we weren't taking into account at all. And if we invite residents who have that business experience, that intellectual experience, in to help provide that feedback, and oftentimes cities want to entice investment in commercial properties in a downtown area, for example. But if the city staff doesn't understand where the cost points are for development, so my favorite example is cities might offer the opportunity to go from 1 story to 3 stories in a commercial area. Well, for a developer, that's just getting exponentially more expensive, and you really have to get to 8 stories before the numbers kind of um, uh, before you actually get to an incentive that creates the desire to invest in that property. Or with parking requirements or any of those things that we use to make restrictions on development. If people really want to see changes in their community, they need to understand and set regulations to match the market realities, or not.
Yeah, no,
Because
that makes perfect sense.
yeah,
Perfect sense. There's a couple of other things here remaining, but I think we're coming close to our time limits. Let me see here. Standing committee members are typically thought leaders on a given topic. That's why they're there. So right now, the way the model works is the city's committees will meet regularly, usually at least once a month, sometimes more. They'll have a city council member who's the liaison there, and there's a monthly report that's written and sent out. But the only people who see that is the city leadership, not the council. And so a lot of the feedback that comes from the committees, unless it's specifically aimed at the council, they'll never know about it. And it's a model that's been adopted in this environment for some years, certainly as long as I served. And mostly it worked, but there's a whole lot of instances where the really irritating features of a particular topic just continued, and nobody really knew. So, given that background and that top level scenario, what would you do to change that model to help improve the communications between the people and the city government and the council who is supposed to be guiding that? How can we fix that?
well, it's interesting. I had a housing commission in Menlo Park when I was the Affordable Housing and Economic Development Manager, and the commission was completely underutilized. They had moved it to quarterly meetings, and and this is a commission that is charged partly with helping to develop affordable housing in Menlo Park, which, like Los Altos Hills, is among the most expensive real estate in the country.
That's right.
So with uh, we we developed the committee and brought in some folks who are really excited about affordable housing. And I told them, I am going to make you experts in affordable housing. So, I in my budget, I set aside, a modest amount of money for sending them to local seminars, for making sure that I would purchase uh, memberships for organizations. I mean, frankly, if I'd bring in affordable housing developers and have them present to the committee, because I wanted my committee members, my housing commission members, to be experts in that field. And then when we developed our affordable housing strategic plan, I had the chair and the vice chair of the commission present it to the council, because there's nothing more credible than having residents provide that information to the city council. And of course, I supported them and I helped them put together the presentation, but it was important to me that they were the ones presenting to the council. So the council saw them and knew that this was something that was a true partnership between staff and the commission members. And the commission members had that experience. I've presented over 200 times to a city council. I don't need any more practice doing it, but this is an opportunity for commission members to take ownership of the work and ownership of the goals, and then also to consider whether they might want to serve in leadership in another capacity. And I think there are far too many situations where we feel like we have to control what people are going to say and therefore exclude them, when if we just work to make sure that everybody has access to objective information, then what comes out of that process is going to be what's best for the community, because it's made up of people in the community.
Yeah. One of the things right now I forgot to mention was the fact that, well, each committee creates a monthly report. That report doesn't get to the council. And so they're really, unless they're involved in it, it usually goes nowhere.
Mhm.
I think that's a huge miscalculation in terms of communication process in Los Altos Hills. That's a minor thing, but at the bottom line, ultimately, some of these issues rise to the top. You get a lot of discussion and decision making, but I think it helps to have that growing build of information, having experienced it, and then when it does come before the council members, they can make more effective decisions. From my perspective, that was one of the big shortfalls I found in working there. It never occurred to me until just this minute, and you're speaking about it, and how simple that could be to fix that. Last question here. Could the city manager better empower committee members, other beyond what you've spoken about? And what I'm thinking about here is maybe that broader discussion of the monthly report or something of that nature. Something that needs to happen here that hasn't, that, most of the council members have no idea what's going on in any other committees other than the one that they might serve on. That's not a good answer. So what would you do to change that?
Well, and I have to be honest with you, Gary, I'm not an expert on Los Altos Hills
Oh, I know that. I'm just
at all.
philosophical.
I do. I think it's incredibly valuable for communication with elected officials to be encouraged by the city manager. All too often, um, there's a feeling of the need to control that. The city manager I worked for in Menlo Park was an excellent example of openness and collaboration, and he's currently the city manager in Ventura, and he was phenomenal in encouraging people to talk to the council. It's it's usually, and I've experienced the opposite, and it's usually the city managers that are insecure with their job and in some cases trying to hide something that don't encourage residents and applicants to talk to the council. And I've even seen where city managers will punish an applicant or a resident, in the form of a being dressed down or some critique for going directly to the council when, you know, the council needs to be well informed. And so, I would come up with monthly is going to be is too onerous on staff, too onerous on the council, and too onerous on committee members. Because after all, committee members are volunteering their time. But I could see having a rotating quarterly report from the different commissions where you might have two or three a council meeting come in and just give a quick update on the top things that they're working on. And it could be either a quarterly or biannual thing, because stuff in city government, unfortunately, as we all know, doesn't move that fast. So
No, really?
uh,
Tell me about it.
it's all set up to move at a glacial pace to avoid the revolution. But I think there is a slow revolution taking place where people have a lot more access to information and a lot more a much higher expectation of customer service. And I think that's great, because we need people to be more involved in their government and be paying attention to what's happening. And I think there's nothing more valuable than that quick presentation. Even if it was just each committee got 5 to 10 minutes to tell the council about their top 3 priorities and what they're working on during a council meeting for on a, like I said, a quarterly or biannual basis. I mean, that's time well spent, and it's an opportunity to really develop those committee members and their personal experience with government. So, I mean, that's probably the top thing I would do. If there was something that was a little more emergent, I would make it a priority to have that communication happen at a council meeting.
Understand. Jim Comer, thank you for participating here. We really appreciate your help and your view on the topics. And I guess the last question I'm going to pose to you here is, how would you briefly, and I realize this is a broad thing, but how would you summarize an ideal working relationship between the city manager, the council, the staff, and more importantly, the residents? How would you define that?
So I have always been very open, I'm in that rare situation of actually having run for office myself. So I ran for city council in San Jose, and I recently ran for school board here in Paso Robles. People are always so afraid to give out their cell numbers. And, and I say it so specifically as to a cell number, but it's like they forget that you can ignore a phone call or a text message if you want to. And, at one point I used to joke that my cell number was probably one of the most widely dispersed numbers in Silicon Valley. And I, whether it was members of the media or residents or council members or other city staff, everyone had my cell number and could text me. And personally, I find that a great way to communicate. So, it's very easy to get a Google Voice number that is not your actual cell number. I think that in the best case scenario, council members, staff, residents, and the city manager have that text relationship where they can text each other. I still get text messages from the elected officials that I served with in Menlo Park, and they're all great folks. And I think that it needs to be that level of that openness, and and it's something that I always wanted to be that available to the council and to the resident community leaders that I worked with.
I understand. Thank you, Jim. Appreciate it. I'm going to summarize here real quick here, folks. I think we're at a pivotal point in our history, and we hope that this talk and others to follow are going to encourage our residents to get involved in helping to shape the next 65 years. We've had 65 behind us. We're kind of in a downhill at points, but I think we can turn that around. I think the reason why our town is so great is because we live in an active involvement of residents. It happens that way, and they're pushing. Now, having said that, we're going to close, but I want to invite you to come back to us the next time we have more interviews. We will have others. And as we prepare them, we will post them, the dates and times, and make sure that people understand where and when to come on board and look at them. And Jim, I want to thank you for taking the time to come and talk with us and see how the other side works. We do appreciate that. And with that, I think we're going to conclude. Jim, thank you for attending, and for all of you out there who have a chance to listen and hear what's going on. Thank you for your attendance. Appreciate it. And with that,
Thank you, Gary.
I think we'll close it off. See you later. Bye-bye.